What happens when a media-savvy royal meets an unflinching journalist who refuses to follow palace rules? You won't believe what happens when Meghan Markle sits down with Tamron Hall expecting soft questions, only to face a relentless interrogation that exposes uncomfortable truths. Last night's explosive exchange left viewers stunned as years of carefully managed public relations unraveled in real time. Before diving into this incredible story, hit that subscribe button and leave a comment, because what unfolds when these two powerhouses clash is the most dramatic television moment of the year. The tension was palpable the moment Meghan Markle stepped onto the Tamron Hall show set, dressed in an elegant cream blazer that shimmered under the studio lights. She carried herself with the practiced grace of someone used to controlling narratives. Her signature smile was perfectly in place as she settled into the guest chair, but seasoned viewers could sense a subtle rigidity and indication she wasn't entirely at ease with the evening's setup. Tamron Hall, renowned for her sharp interviewing style and refusal to let celebrities coast through promotional appearances, had clearly done her homework. The veteran journalist sat across from her guest with a thick stack of notes, far more than what one would expect for a discussion about Meghan's latest humanitarian efforts. The atmosphere in Studio 1A was charged with an energy even the production crew seemed to notice. Cameras were positioned to capture every micro-expression. "Meghan, thank you for being here tonight," Tamron began, her voice balancing warmth and steel, the hallmark of her formidable television presence. "I know you're here to discuss your new partnerships with charitable organizations, but our viewers would appreciate some context on your recent public statements." Meghan's smile faltered for a fraction of a second before returning. "Of course, Tamron, I'm always happy to talk about the important work we're doing to support communities in need," she replied. But Tamron wasn't allowing her guests to stick to rehearsed talking points. "Okay, I'm referring to your comments last month about media accountability and journalists' responsibility to tell complete stories. Some saw those remarks as a critique of coverage you've received over the past few years. Can you clarify what you meant?" The question hung in the air. Meghan's media training kicked in immediately. Her posture straightened as she delivered what sounded like a prepared response on the importance of authentic storytelling in journalism. Yet Tamron's expression suggested she wasn't buying the deflection. "That's interesting," Tamron interrupted smoothly, "because when I reviewed the coverage you're referencing, much of it came from documented public records, court filings, and statements from your own representatives. Are you suggesting reporting factual information is unfair treatment?" Meghan's hands, resting gracefully in her lap, began fidgeting with her wedding ring, a subtle sign that the conversation was moving into unexpected territory. "I think context matters, Tamron," she said. "Stories told without full context can create narratives that don't reflect the complete truth." "Let's talk about context," Tamron pressed, consulting her notes with the precision of a prosecutor. "Your legal team filed numerous lawsuits against media outlets over the past 3 years, citing privacy violations and defamation. Many of those cases were withdrawn or settled out of court with no admission of wrongdoing. If the reporting was inaccurate, why not pursue the cases fully and clear your name definitively?" The studio seemed to hold its breath. This wasn't the gentle celebrity interview Meghan had anticipated. Camera operators subtly adjusted their positions, sensing something significant unfolding. The audience, initially excited to see the former royal, now watched intently as a carefully curated public image began to crack under scrutiny. Meghan's response carried noticeable tension. Legal strategies are complex, and sometimes the emotional toll of prolonged litigation outweighs the benefit of vindication, especially when the focus is on positive work that truly helps people. "Vindication would strengthen your humanitarian work," Tamron countered seamlessly. "If media outlets were publishing false information about you, wouldn't proving that in court enhance your credibility for the causes you prioritize?" The former actress shifted in her chair, her composed demeanor showing more strain with each exchange. You're oversimplifying a complicated situation, Tamron. In a media landscape that thrives on controversy, sometimes the most powerful response is to rise above the noise and focus on substance. Tamron leaned forward, her instincts as a journalist fully engaged. I understand that perspective, but let's examine specifics. Last year, your spokesperson claimed a story about your interactions with palace staff was false. Yet, when pressed for details, no clarification was provided. How can the public distinguish legitimate criticism from unfair attacks when your team's responses are vague? The question struck like lightning. Meghan's carefully maintained smile vanished completely, replaced by an expression that suggested she was realizing this wouldn't be the friendly, promotional conversation she had expected. Her voice took on an edge that hadn't been there moments before. I find it concerning that you're essentially asking me to relitigate every story written about me over the past several years. That's not why I'm here, and frankly, it's not productive for anyone. What Tamron was just getting started. Her reputation as an unflinching interviewer was fully on display as she prepared to probe further into contradictions and inconsistencies, turning this appearance into a tense ordeal for her increasingly uncomfortable guest. Actually, Meghan, I think it is productive, Tamron said, her voice deceptively calm, the tone of an experienced journalist who knows she struck a nerve. When public figures make claims about media accountability, the public deserves to understand what that actually means in practice. She flipped through her notes with deliberate precision, each turn making Meghan visibly more uneasy. Let's discuss your recent interview where you spoke about speaking your truth. That phrase has become something of a signature for you. But truth by definition isn't subjective. Either something happened or it didn't. Either someone said something or they didn't. When you say, my truth, are you acknowledging that your version might differ from documented facts? Meghan's jaw tightened, almost imperceptibly, caught by the cameras. I think you're playing word games, Tamron. People's lived experiences are valid, regardless of how others interpret or report them. But interpretation and reporting are different things. Tamron shot back immediately. Reporting involves documenting what actually occurred, when multiple independent sources confirm the same information. And it contradicts your public statements. How do you reconcile that difference? The studio audience, previously attentive, was now silent. Even the usual rustle of shifting seats stopped as everyone sensed they were witnessing something unprecedented. Meghan's publicist in the front row grew increasingly agitated, checking her phone repeatedly as if hoping for an emergency to interrupt the interview. I think what you're doing right now is exactly the problem, Meghan said, her voice rising slightly. You're taking complex human situations and reducing them to some kind of courtroom cross-examination. That's not journalism. That's ambush tactics. Tamron raised an eyebrow, signal regular viewers knew meant a pointed response was coming. Ambush tactics. Meghan, these questions are based on your own public statements and documented records. If asking for clarification about inconsistencies is an ambush, what does that say about the narrative itself? The tension in the room was almost visible. Meghan's hands were no longer just fidgeting with her ring. She gripped the chair's arms so tightly, her knuckles turned white. Her carefully applied makeup couldn't hide the flush of anger rising in her cheeks. You know what, Tamron? I came here in good faith to discuss important work helping real people with real problems. But you seem more interested in tabloid-style gotcha journalism than meaningful conversation about issues that matter. Then let's talk about issues that matter, Tamron replied smoothly, unfazed. Your foundation received significant donations from high-profile individuals and corporations. Public records show nearly 60% of those donations went to administrative costs in the first year. Can you explain why such a large percentage went to overhead rather than direct aid? The question landed like a bombshell. Meghan opened her mouth slightly, then closed it, struggling to respond. For someone experienced with media scrutiny, this moment of visible confusion was striking. The camera zoomed in, capturing every nuance of her expression. Those figures are... That's taking financial reports out of context, she stammered, her usual eloquence filling her at the worst moment. Starting a foundation requires significant infrastructure. You can't just write checks and call it charity work. Of course not, Tamron said reasonably, but relentlessly. But 60% for administrative costs is far above industry standards. The American Institute of Philanthropy recommends overhead not exceed 25% of donations. Can you explain what specific investments required more than double that percentage? Meghan's breathing became shallow, and she glanced repeatedly at her publicist, as if hoping for intervention. I'm not going to sit here, defend our financial decisions to someone who came in with a predetermined agenda to make me look bad. My agenda is simple, Tamron said, with steel in her voice. To ask the questions responsible journalism requires when interviewing public figures who influence public opinion and solicit public donations. If those questions make you uncomfortable, perhaps the issue isn't with the questions, Tamron said, the words hanging in the air like a challenge that couldn't be ignored. Meghan's carefully constructed public persona was visibly cracking under the sustained pressure of accountability. Her media training, which had served her well in countless interviews, seemed insufficient for a journalist who wouldn't accept deflections or non-answers. This is exactly what I mean about the toxic nature of media coverage, Meghan said, her voice carrying unmistakable anger. You're not interested in understanding our context. You're interested in creating drama and conflict for entertainment. Tamron leaned back slightly, expression professional despite the personal attack. Meghan, asking public figures to explain their statements and account for the use of public donations, isn't toxic. It's fundamental journalism. The fact that you see basic accountability as an attack suggests a defensiveness viewers might find concerning. The production team was in overdrive. Cameras capturing every angle of what was rapidly becoming television gold. The scheduled commercial break was still minutes away, but the tension in the studio had reached a fever pitch. Something was about to break, and everyone felt it. Meghan suddenly stood, startling the camera operators. You know what? I don't have to sit here and be subjected to this hostile interrogation disguised as journalism. Tamron remained seated, her composure unshaken, even as Meghan towered over her in what seemed like an attempt at intimidation. Please sit down, Meghan. We're live. Walking away from legitimate questions doesn't make them disappear. It only makes viewers wonder what you're hiding. Hi. Meghan's voice cracked with indignation. I'm not hiding anything. I'm refusing to participate in a character assassination masquerading as an interview. This isn't journalism, Tamron. This is a hit job, and I won't be part of it. The studio audience sat in stunned silence, some recording on their phones, recognizing a historic television moment. Meghan's publicist had risen from her seat, urgently gesturing toward the control room, clearly hoping for a commercial break to end the nightmare. Tamron's voice remained calm, professional, and devastatingly steady. A hit job involves false accusations or inappropriate questions. I've asked you to explain your own statements, clarify documented inconsistencies, and account for charitable donations. If basic accountability feels like character assassination, what does that say about your relationship with transparency? Stop it, Meghan snapped, pointing at Tamron, the gesture almost threatening under the studio lights. Stop with your sanctimonious lecture on journalism and accountability. You ambushed me with financial records, taken out of context, twisted my words, and created a hostile environment designed to make me look bad no matter how I responded. Tamron finally stood, matching Meghan's height, but maintaining her professionalism, even as her guest seemed to be having a meltdown live. Meghan, the financial records I referenced are publicly available from your foundation's filings. The quotes come from your own interviews and social media. Nothing is out of context. I've simply asked you to explain them. Explain them to who? Meghan shouted, her voice distorting slightly through the studio microphones. To you? To an audience already convinced of my guilt based on years of negative coverage. to a media establishment that profits from tearing down successful women, especially women of color, who challenge the status quo. Tamron's expression hardened imperceptibly. "Don't," she said firmly. "Don't hide behind identity politics when you're being held accountable. I've faced real discrimination and barriers in this industry, but I've never used that as a shield to avoid answering legitimate questions about my professional conduct." Meghan's face flushed with anger and embarrassment. "How dare you lecture me about discrimination? You have no idea what I or my family have endured from relentless media persecution." "Then explain it," Tamron replied, her patience thinning. "Provide specific examples. Name the false stories. Show evidence of persecution. That's accountability. That's transparency." The challenge hung in the air like a gauntlet thrown down. Everyone knew this was the moment of truth. Either Meghan would provide evidence for her claims, or she would reveal that her accusations were as empty as they seemed. For a long moment, Meghan stood frozen, mouth opening and closing as if trying to form a response that never came. The silence stretched, broken only by the faint hum of studio equipment and the collective held breath of everyone present. "This is insane," Meghan finally said, her voice carrying a defeated tone that sharply contrasted with her earlier defiance. "I came here to talk about helping people, about making a positive difference in the world. And you've turned it into some kind of prosecutorial interrogation. You came here as a public figure, asking for support and donations." Tamron corrected her firmly. "The public has a right to know that their support is justified and their donations are being used appropriately. That's not persecution, Meghan. That's citizenship." Meghan began backing toward the edge of the set, her movements awkward and uncertain. "I'm done. I'm absolutely done with this. You can air whatever you want. Edit this however serves your narrative, right? But I won't be a participant in my own public execution." "There's no editing in live television," Tamron said calmly. "What viewers are seeing is exactly what's happening in your responses. Your defensiveness, your inability to provide straight answers to straight questions. That's not editing. That's reality." The words seemed to strike Meghan like physical blows. She turned to her publicist, now standing and clearly preparing to escort her off the set. "We're leaving. This interview is over." But Tamron wasn't finished. "Meghan, you can walk away from this conversation, but you can't walk away from the questions themselves. They'll still be there tomorrow and the day after that, and viewers will remember how you chose to handle them tonight." Meghan spun one final time, her composure completely shattered, her face flushed with anger and embarrassment. "You know what viewers will remember, Tamron? They'll remember that you ambushed a guest who came in good faith, that you prioritized sensationalism over substance, and that you proved exactly why people have lost trust in mainstream media." "What they'll remember," Tamron replied with devastating finality, "is that when asked to account for your public statements and explain your use of charitable donations, you chose to storm off rather than provide answers. That will speak louder than any accusations you want to make about my journalism." With that, Meghan Markle turned and walked off the set, her heels clicking sharply against the studio floor as her publicist hurried after her. The cameras followed her exit, capturing every step until she disappeared behind the studio curtains, leaving Tamron standing alone before a stunned audience. Tamron turned to face the camera directly, her professional composure intact despite presiding over one of the most dramatic guest walkouts in recent television history. When we return, we'll be discussing media accountability and the importance of asking tough questions, even when the answers are uncomfortable. Don't go anywhere. As the show cut to commercial, the studio buzzed with excited conversation about what had just transpired. Tamron Hall had done what many journalists attempted, but few accomplished. She cut through years of carefully crafted public relations and forced a confrontation with reality that her guest simply couldn't handle. The aftermath would dominate social media for days, but in that moment, the truth had been served regardless of how uncomfortable it made everyone involved.